Okay,
Alright guys, so this is the CS 100 final review. So anyone have any questions before we start? Okay. So while loop versus for loop. So when do we want to use a while loop? Anyone know?
When you want to keep checking for something?
When you want to keep checking for something, okay. More specifically, right? If we know the number, so here, let's make a little chart here. So if we know the number of elements that we want to iterate over, which one do we use? Do we use a for loop or a while loop?
For loop.
So this is when we know the number of elements. And a while loop, that's when we don't know the number of elements. So what else do you guys know about for loops and while loops?
If you set the while loop true, it's gonna be infinite.
Yeah. And does anyone know a really useful thing to do with the for loop and the range function? Remember, we could do for variable in range number, right? And what that's going to do, it's going to iterate through the for loop. This number of times. And let me just check to make sure that that's all you guys need to know. Okay, yeah, so I think the best thing for us to do now is we're gonna jump right in to now continue versus break. Alright, so no more questions on a while loop or for loop?
How do you set it to infinite?
How do you, the infinite loop? Well, that's going to be if you have a while true condition. So if you have while
true,
and somehow you don't break out of that while loop, then you're just going to continually iterate over that. So yeah, that might be useful for servers and stuff in other classes, like when you get into other classes, but for now, you kind of want to stay away from this. You kind of always want to have a condition. Clear a little room on the board here. So the next thing we're going to go over is break versus continue. So just like for loops and while loops, we have break and continue, which are similar things, but they're also pretty different, and you use them in different cases. So does anyone know what the similarity between these two things are? The similarity is that only the innermost loop is affected. So if you have a for loop, and you have another for loop inside of that for loop, and then you catch a break or a continue statement, right? It's only going to affect this loop right here. Does everyone understand that? Anyone have any questions on that?
Alright, so if you use a break in the second for loop, and then, alright, so you're iterating inside of, you're iterating through a list.
Right.
And the break is in the second for loop. What, let's say it breaks with the first word, and then it's supposed to iterate to the second word. Would that go back to the second for loop?
Good question. So it would break out of this, right? It would go up to this for loop, and then inside of this for loop, yes, it would go back down to that. It would just break out for that current iteration.
Wait, so what if I have a break or continue after the first one?
After the first one, another good question. You have that. See, this is the indentation here for this for loop. So now you'd put a break or a continue here. Now this is a different story, because now you're not inside of this loop, so this no longer becomes the innermost loop. This becomes the innermost loop, because the indentation is indented here.
Oh, I see.
See? Any other questions on that? So basically the main difference between break and continue. Break is going to exit the loop. Right? So if we have a for loop, and then I'm actually, to illustrate this, I'm going to do the nested for loop example, where you have a for loop, another for loop, and then you have a break. You break out of this for loop, right? So the execution, if we call this for loop 1, we call this for loop 2, you're breaking out of the execution of for loop 2, and you're returning to for loop 1. But now, continue is the next iteration. That's how you jump to the next iteration. So you have, again, for loop 1, for loop 2, this becomes a continue, right? Now we take a look here. Okay, so for loop 1, for loop 2, continue. And continue, all that's going to do, you return to the next iteration of for loop 2. Does everyone see the difference? So with the continue, you're cycling through for loop 2. You're just going to the next iteration. With the break statement, you're popping out of for loop 2. You're going back to for loop 1. That doesn't mean you're not going to enter for loop 2 again. That just means that for that current iteration of for loop 2, you're terminating execution of that for loop and you're going to that top one. So I think that might answer your question now.
Wait, does the continue, if it's true, does it break out of the statement?
Okay, good question again. So, okay. So you have a for loop, right?
Yeah.
And it's for, so we'll do for I in range 4, and then for j in range 3. And I think this will illustrate your example. So your question, so 0, 1, 2, 3, right? That's going to be, it's going to iterate like that.
Yeah.
So I is going to progress from 0, then 1, 2, 3, through each iteration.
Mm-hmm.
Now the for j in range, it's going to be j equals 0, 1, 2, and we're going to have 0, 1, 2. Right? So now your question was on the continue, I believe.
Yeah.
So if we do continue here, then when we're on 0, so okay, so here I equals 0, here j equals 0, continue. Okay, so all that means is that whilst I is still going to equal 0 now, because we haven't continued this, remember it affects the innermost loop, this right here. This is the innermost loop that we hit. It just means j is now going to equal 1. So the pattern now is going to be that, and effectively this does nothing here because it would still iterate through this way just like this. But right now, just to show the point of the continue, j equals 1, then j is going to equal 2, so it first equals 0, right? But we continued to 1, we continued to 2, we continued to 3, right, for the whole iteration. Now, and then after we've taken care of that, we come back up here, and then I equals 1. But now if this was a break statement, terminates execution, this becomes I equals 1 on the next iteration, and you're effectively only hitting j equals 0, and then on the I equals 1 part for I in range 3. So now you're just breaking right out of that. Does that answer your question better?
Yeah.
Does anyone need this to copy this down, or can I? I'll just leave that up there for a few more minutes. Okay. So now we'll go to the scope of variables. So does anyone know anything about scope and namespaces? So basically, scope, we have local and we have global. So this is inside a function, and this is for the whole program. So all this is saying is if we go define plus num, just a quick definition of a function, right? So we're defining, let's say, plus, and we're giving it, let's give it num1 and num2. Num1, num2. Right? And now we're going to say, you know, num1, so sum equals num1 plus num2. Okay? What understand, does the whole program understand what num1 and num2 are? Or is that just plus? What understands these two parameters?
It knows that num1 and 2 are two different variables.
Well, num1 and num2 are two different variables, but if you wrote outside of this function num1, like, okay, is this a valid statement? Right? We defined our function, and now outside the function we're going to say number equals num1. Is that valid for me to say that?
No.
Exactly. Because the program doesn't know what num1 is. This function, plus, knows what num1 is. But the program doesn't know what num1 is. Now I have another question. Up here, I'm going to say sum equals 5. Is that valid? Is that okay? Because now I have a variable up here and a variable down here. Is that okay?
No.
Will they interfere with each other?
So num1 plus num2 has to equal 5 then, does it?
Not necessarily, because now we're getting the local versus global. So I'm actually going to illustrate this with a picture for you guys, but first what I want to point out is this sum is global. The whole program understands sum is 5. Within the confines of this function, sum equals num1 plus num2. So if you're inside of this function, sum is num1 plus num2. But if you're outside of this function, sum is 5.
Oh, okay.
So I'm actually going to further illustrate that point with a little diagram.
So sum equals what? Sum equals num1 plus num2 is local?
Sum equals num1, that's local, yes.
Okay.
That's understood only inside of the function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a big circle here. And this is your whole program. Right? So this is your computer program. So Python program. So that's a whole program that you've written. And a program, we know it's going to be composed of functions. We know we're going to have variables. So now inside of here, I'm going to draw a little cloud here. And this is how one of my other professors actually likes to put it. You have a little cloud here. And this is going to be a function. Right? So inside of this, you have all these functions. Function. Function. But you also have this group of data here. And inside of here, this is the data. This is the global data. Right? So we could say num equals 5. That means throughout this whole program, num equals 5. But inside of each of these functions, we could also say num equals 1, num equals 2, and num equals 3. To function 1, num equals 1. To function 2, num equals 2. To function 3, num equals 3. When you ask the program what's the value of num, the value of num is 5. When you ask the function what's the value of num, the value of num is either 1, 2, or 3, depending on what function you're asking. You see? Now Python has a way that if you define something in a function, you could override the global instance of that variable. So what that is, it's the global keyword. Now that gets a little hairy, because now if we say global num equals 3, We just made num equal to 3.
Yep.
Also, you did the
You
function.
can change the
So
value.
that's one of the things you have to watch out for on the test. If you say global inside of a function for a variable, that changes the whole value.
So how would you use this in a program? Like,
How do you use what in a program? Which one?
how would you use like the global data and the function? Like, how would you change it? Like, if you do global num,
Right.
how would you use that in a program to like help you out with global data? Like,
Yeah, you use it if your function did something, and let's say, okay, so we have num equals num1 plus num2, and that's inside of a function. And we, let's say, had an if statement, you know, if the user inputs num1 and num2, num is this. And then, but outside of this, we've defined num because we say, okay, our user may not want to enter numbers right now. So we've defined num to say 10 because 10, let's say we're playing a game, and num is your standard number of HP. So we're saying, okay, 10 HP. But let's say if the user puts in 2 numbers from, you know, the past 2 levels they played, they could get that amount of HP. Well, some users are just coming in on this first level, so we want to give them, this is like almost your default value. But we say here global, and that's a good catch, global num, we have to say global there, or this num has no effect. We say global num, we've just reset their HP now to num1 plus num2, whatever that is. Now remember, the global program itself doesn't understand what num1 and num2 are necessarily, but what it does understand is that when this is evaluated inside of this function and the value is given to the global num, that value is also going to be given to the global value, the variable of the program.
so if you want to do that, do you do global and parentheses num, or?
I believe it's a keyword, and I can actually double check that with you in the notes right now. But I believe global is a keyword, so I believe you won't even have to put it in parentheses. I believe you could just write it like that. But I just want to double check. It's just keyword. Okay.
Just global.
Thanks for checking. Yep. So now we have that, so we can check that off. Does anyone else have any other questions on the local versus global? Okay, so as one of the other TAs pointed out to me, Bo pointed out, he was looking through past finals, and 30 to 40% of them were dictionaries. So what exactly does this mean? Well, this means that dictionaries can encompass 12 to 16 points on just the multiple choice section alone. Plus, you're probably going to have to use a dictionary on at least one of the programming questions as part of it. Or you always want to have some of the best programs, you always have these things at your fingertips so that, you know, you could use, because on a question, it may be easiest to solve with a dictionary, but now you forget something about a dictionary, may not be on that review sheet, the sheet that they give you, the 2-page sheet, and now you're like, oh, I could have used a dictionary, could have made my life easier, I got to use a list now, I got to do all these extra things to it. So you want to make sure you definitely know dictionary, so we're going to definitely cover that very in depth. And so 12 to 16 points, that could be the difference between passing, failing, a B and an A, whatever your goal is. So you really want to know dictionaries like inside and out. And that goes for lists as well, but I mean, I think most of you have the hang of lists. The one thing I'd say is having the difference between slicing and indexing. All you guys know that, right? If you see a colon, it's a slice, it's a sub element of something. If you see just brackets and something, that's indexing. But I'm pretty sure you get that by now. I really want to cover the dictionaries. And I actually noted down on one of those review sheets important slides to memorize. Because really with dictionaries, you really want to come in with this stuff memorized, just because that's one of the biggest parts of this final. So I mean 30 to 40%, I mean, that's like a third of your test is dictionaries. Or if we base it off of analysis of past tests, it could potentially be 30-40%. Of course, they could choose to not give any dictionaries this time. Who knows? But I highly doubt they're going to change after doing all that. So the Python 3.4 documentation covers dictionaries. I highly recommend that you memorize and understand not only the documentation and the description of dictionaries, but also all the lecture 7 slides which cover dictionaries. And I'm going to cover a few important points about dictionaries. So if you look through the practice finals, you're going to see that some of the questions mix in the topics you've learned. You're also going to see continue and break in those questions. So we already went through those. And it's absolutely essential that you understand the code on all of these problems and trace the code to ensure that you obtain the correct answer. Basically, some people, they go in and they look at it and they get a gut feeling of what the answer is and they put it. I don't know if any of you guys have done that, but you really, I mean, I would say the plan of attack, before we jump into the dictionary stuff, I just want to see the plan of attack for any question.
Cool.
This is your plan of attack, and this is going to be multiple choice, and we're going to give you a plan of attack for programming. So, programming. And so the time that you have, right? Now, I don't usually like to do things by time because I feel like if you know something inside and out and then you don't know another thing, you know, you might want to spend most of your time on the multiple choice because the programming questions you might be so great at, you might ace them. But the time that you have, I believe, is 2:30 to 5.
Yeah.
So you get 2.5 hours.
It's
Now,
a
one benefit,
long time.
yeah, one benefit of this is they may, I don't know if they're adding a couple more questions or if they're just leaving it. But I mean, compared to your other things, you're getting an extra hour here, so you really want to spend that the best you can. So in order to spend that the best you can, sitting there with a blank stare in your face for 10 minutes at the paper, that's not going to do anything. But if you have a plan of attack, well, now you know how to do it. And I'm going to tell you when you should skip a question and go back to it, or when you should just answer that question. So your plan of attack for multiple choice, I'd say glance. I'd say first you just want to glance. Glance at the problem. And there's actually really two main methods of attack, but we'll get to that in a second. These are general. No matter which method of attack you use, these things that I'm saying here are going to apply to everybody. I think you just want to glance at the problem, read through the code. Okay, I understand this. There's a break statement, a continue statement, this and that. Next, you want to understand what's going on. And the best way to understand is you want to go line by line. This is before you even trace the code. You're not even tracing the values right now. You're not just jumping in and starting to trace values because you might get tripped up. You know, you might not fully understand it. You want to understand it, and you also want to make notes. So, for example, if there's an unfamiliar variable to you and you don't realize what it's doing, look back where that variable is referenced in the program and then say, oh, this right here, well, it says return num. And up here, it says num equals num1 plus num2 plus x. And you see x equals 5. And then, okay, so now you might just want to come down here and just put an arrow here and just say num1 plus num2 plus x. And if num1 and num2 were parameters, then, okay, these two parameters and this variable x, right? So now you're instantly making note to yourself so that when you get down there, when you've read those 10 lines of code and your head's just so boggled, you can say, okay, well, I made note of this, so now I know what this is going. And if you watched me trace in that last class that I helped you guys out with, if you watched me trace the code I showed you, I started making notes in different colors. Okay, well, with the red, this variable refers to this, that refers to that. You can't get around that. This is one of the core things. Besides tracing the code, this is the most important part. You're making notes to yourself so that when you go back and you start tracing this code, it's so much easier for you to follow because they're gonna mess with your head on this test because they're just going to start putting in extra information. They're going to put a global variable and a local variable, and you're going to need to know the differences. And I highly suggest that you start defining things as global and local, and then just start seeing what the output is. Because I guarantee you, in some way, that's going to be on there. Once you make these notes, then you want to trace the code. Now, we showed the table method of tracing the code. I mean, and I kind of agree. If you don't practice, it's going to take time. So I don't see why you have to. When you're making a table, I don't see why you have to draw all these lines and actually go through and fill in each variable. What I would recommend, the way I like to do it and the way I did it in class and the way that it was really quick, it took like 2 minutes after I had done all this, it took like 1-2 minutes to trace the code. Just do what Python tutor does. Make little boxes. num1, num2, and x. And now num1, that's 1 on the first iteration. Num2, 2, and x is 5. Second iteration, I mean, there's 2 ways you could do it. You could go comma, so this is the second iteration, now it's 2, or you could change this whole value to 2. Whichever way helps you to keep track. I don't know, however you guys want to do it, but that's the way you keep track of your variables. You don't have to make this whole elaborate table and like you're an artist and you have to make sure your line's perfectly straight. You just want to get the right answer. So, but it's tracing your code and making notes. If you don't do these, and especially if you don't glance at the problem and understand it. You know, glancing at the problem just means you're not just jumping into understanding. You're saying, okay, let me look at this whole block of code. You know, is there anything that stands out to me? Is there anything that doesn't make sense? And then after that, then when you start understanding it, you're going to start putting those pieces together. Now, the two main methods I was talking about, I want to just jump into those a little bit. One is you go through the test, and each question, you just do these things to one by one by one by one. There's another way to do it. You could take this glance, and you could extend it to a 1 to 2 minute glance. And what you're going to do then is you're going to glance the entire test of multiple choice, or if you choose to attack the programming first, it's mainly choosing what you want to do. Do you want to attack the programming questions before the multiple choice? Do you want to do the multiple choice before the programming? Or do you want to jump around and say, okay, I know break statements and continue like the back of my hand. So if I see break and continue in there, now granted the question may test a little bit more than that, I'm going to do all those questions first. Or I know dictionaries could be 30 to 40% of this based on the past finals that we received. So I know dictionaries now. I'm going to jump in and do every question where I see a dictionary. So it's really up to you how you want to attack it, but all I'm going to say is if after a while you don't get it, skip and come back. But what I'm going to say with this, be very careful. Mark it on your test, and don't forget to come back, because I've talked to people that have been like, oh, I forgot to answer these last 3 questions that I skipped. I could have gotten this, but now I ended up with a lower mark. Well, that's because you skipped, but you didn't do the second part, just come back. It's pretty important. Now, the programming plan of attack. Later on, I'm going to go over how to ace any turtle question you're given. I think the people from our section already probably know this. But the plan of attack with the programming, it's sort of the same. You're going to glance. Now, one of the things that really tripped me up is when I was actually taking the test. You know how on the top of each page it says like the problem number. So this is one thing that really tripped me up was you have this little thing here, and it's in pretty small print, and it just says problem 12 code. Now, when you take this test and you're in the zone, you're not really going to pay attention to this. But each page is actually labeled with what question they want on that page. Be very careful. Be very careful, because this I had to rewrite my programming questions the day of the test because of this. Which, granted, when you're rewriting a question, it actually helps, which is why I'm going to tell you guys in a second, one of the keys to doing this isn't rewriting the whole program, but it's making a list for yourself. So that's one of the key things you got to remember. They label the pages based on what problem code they want to see on those pages. And just to make sure, Chris, can you see and hear us and everything?
Oh, he can hear us, but I muted him because of the video.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. As long as you can hear us. As long as it's good.
On mute?
I just want to make sure that we didn't like shut him out of the review session or something.
He's good.
He's good? Okay, cool. So, alright, so problem 12 code. So yeah, so we went over that. So programming, you're going to glance, then you're going to understand. And remember, I don't know if you guys know, I actually just learned this myself from Bo, that other TA. For those of you that don't know, he's a professional programmer since he's 15. And he triple major at his last school. That's the other TA for Professor Willits. And he's dual degreeing right now with CS and IT. Basically, you want to understand the problem. And me and Bo were going over some programming stuff, and he really said there's 3 things in the industry. This is how you write code. So there's 3 steps to writing code. Does anyone know where you actually program and write the code? Like where out of these steps, which one? Like when you go to sit down to do a question, do you guys just jump right into the code? Because I know I do that sometimes. I'll just jump in and just be like, all right, let me just pop out 50 lines of code just to try to do it. Right? Because you're going to just get it done, so you just type it out. But really, you're costing yourself time. So who could guess where do you do it at the beginning, in the middle, at the end? Where do you actually write the code?
I think it's the middle.
At the end.
Oh, at
the end. This is where you actually write the code.
Okay.
This is the first one is fully understand the problem.
Fully understand.
And then each step in English.
Oh, so like you write out what you're gonna do in English.
Exactly. Like if you think you need a for loop, iterate through these elements with a for loop. Then do this. Then do this. Then you translate that to code. So I wouldn't say to sit there on your test and write out the English to each question, because again, realistically, you're dealing with time constraints. If you want it, that's great, and you probably have enough time for 2.5 hours. But depending on how fast you can work, at least make a checklist for yourself. Okay, the problem wants this, that, and the other thing. But what are some things with the turtle? They might want you to reset the position of the turtle at the end of the question. It might say make no assumptions about the state of the turtle. Does anyone know what that means?
Yeah.
Either you go.
Yeah. Usually the turtle's like, it's down, the pen's down, and then the arrow faces right. But they're saying don't make an assumption that that's how it started.
Exactly. So mainly what they just say is at the beginning of your turtle program, put the pen down.
Yeah.
And that's really what they're saying. And that's that. And so many people don't understand that what that statement means. So they're going to get between 1 to 5 points off because they didn't do what the question was asking. And that's really, that's how a lot of people get the points off. It's not so much you don't know the programming, it's you don't know how to translate the instructions to the programming. Make a checklist for yourself. Say, okay, I need to remove the punctuation. Well, if I need to remove punctuation, I'm going to do it an easy way. As we were talking about, we use the string library. You'd import string, right? You'd import string, and then later on you can do string.punctuation. And that's to, of course you'd have that in the remove, and but you could use that to remove. That's an easy way to remove stuff. You don't have to do that, but if the questions ask you to remove punctuation, most questions I think on the test, they probably won't ask you to do that. I mean, they always could. They can ask you anything, but I'm pretty sure that is. Oh, okay. So we went over this. Okay, we still need to go over dictionaries, so that's going to be the next step. So we'll do that. And guys, also while I'm writing out a couple of things for dictionaries, you might just want to take a look at these resources. Highly suggest, like one of the ways when I'm preparing for a programming test, what I do is I'll actually watch tutorials from other people on YouTube. I don't know if you've done that yet. And so reading through the documentation helps, but watching the tutorials really helps. The new Boston Python 3.4, make sure you're looking at Python 3.4 tutorials. I know I was looking at Python 2.7 tutorials back in the day, and that kind of tripped me up because when I was first new to programming, I didn't realize there were different versions. But like now I understand that, of course. So Python 3.4, and these are just two explicit links to Python review sheets. The game dev one, it goes over object-oriented stuff. You don't need to know classes, objects for this exam, but I would definitely say look at those. They give you a good idea of what's going on. And the good thing about YouTube videos, they group by topic. So if you want to ace dictionaries, watch the dictionary tutorials. After you go through those, type in Python 3.4 dictionary tutorials. I guarantee you there's going to be at least 3 to 5 that come up that will be significant. Keep watching them, And especially when you get to like the Java courses and stuff, like you want to stay on top of it. You want to go to these resources and you really want to make sure that you're going to ace your test, because sometimes this course really lists out what they expect of you. Some of your other courses are going to say, okay, we'll give you a piece of paper and you're going to write 5 programs for the test. So no Java. And that's, then some of the other classes you might have a professor who just gives you, multiple choice. It's really easy. Well, 50 true false questions about Java, but you still have to know the stuff. So basically dictionaries. Let's see what we're going to go over first. So dictionaries, everyone knows what a dictionary is, right? You have this dictionary D equals, and then you have key value, etc. Right? Of course, that's not actual code. I'm just showing you guys the concept here. So dot items, dot keys. I mean, it's really up to you guys to just sit there and go through the method and say, okay, I think that tonight when you go home, okay, all the for the dictionaries, okay, dot items. It says it returns this. All right, let me type this out. Let's see print d dot items and see what it prints out. Okay, let me see. How would I use this in a for loop? How would I use this? And I mean some key notes on dictionaries. I don't know if I actually put them here. Okay, yeah, here we go. So be really careful with indexing and slicing this sort of stuff, especially when dictionaries are involved, as in the following question from the practice example. Dictionaries are unordered and they can't be indexed. Right? So we're dealing with an unordered data type. So I have a quick question based on what I've said. If we're dealing with an unordered data type that can't be indexed, how do we refer to a value of a dictionary?
It's key.
Yeah, we're going to refer to it with its key. That's true, and we could do that. And we could also use the methods that come with dictionaries to also do that, right? So you have a few ways you could do that. Now, you want to follow the directions of the programming questions to get full credit? Oh, I noticed on the homeworks when I was reviewing them, a lot of you skip certain parts. Now, the way the programming questions, going back to how to ace any programming question on the test, especially the turtle ones, but I'm just looking in general right now. The real way to do it, they have a rubric. I've never seen this rubric, but I've heard a lot about it because I haven't actually graded any tests. You know, I've had like classes and stuff during the time they were grading. But what I've heard about it is this. Each test question, they'll have like a little checklist. And okay, so you get 2 points. You know, let's say it's 20 points. All right, so 2 points, you know, punctuation. So if you strip off that punctuation by following one of the directions, you get 2 points. Now 5 points, 1 for loop. Now let's say the question required 2 for loops, 5 points, 2 for loop, like second for loop. So you really want to follow instructions precisely. I noticed on the homework questions, some of you guys didn't follow the homework instructions precisely, and we had to take off points. But it's even worse here, because now you don't have someone sitting in front of the homework that can say, okay, you know, this is how it's going. They have a strict rubric, so you could be the smartest kid, but if you don't follow the things that they're giving you, the person grading your test is obligated to take off 5 points. They can't give you partial credit when they're saying, you know, these are the things you hit. The partial credit is, okay, you had punctuation, you had the second for loop, you know, the first for loop, you didn't have the second one. The partial credit is you got 7 instead of just getting 0. That's where the partial credit comes in, because you've hit this many things. Now, you know, there are other cases where it's questionable, and then you might get part of those points, but that's why they will do it in a room together to talk about it. You can, but don't have to comment your code or use comments. That's totally up to you. And that tip, I'm only telling you that for the final. In the real world, if you don't comment your code, you won't get a job because nobody will look through the code. So really what I want to point out about this, that last thing I gave you a review sheet on debugging. I'd say for the final, I mean, breeze over, but you're not going to debug on the final. That's really for like life. That's, you know, that's for you guys for like the rest of your lives. Because if you're planning on getting a job in computing, which I hope most of you guys are, you're not just studying this class just because it's an elective and you wanted to take it, but because I could point you to a lot better electives if you're looking to learn computer programming. You don't have to, you know, and you don't want to do this, I can point you to a lot better elective classes. But that's really, you know, that's the key to programming is debugging. I mean, nobody writes perfect code. I mean, you know, maybe some of the guys at the computer say they can, but aside from the people that have been studying it since they were 2, you know, for us human beings, we don't write perfect code, so we have to debug, and we always have to go back. So that's just really some stuff that I picked up over the last couple semesters. I just started programming 3 semesters ago, so just from what certain people have taught me and stuff. So, file input output. So I guess we're going to go through opening and closing, you know, writing from files, closing files. And one of the things about file input output that I wanted to point out here is that, you know, a lot on your homework and stuff, a lot of the common mistakes and stuff, one of the things you guys like to do is inside of a for loop, you like to use the read lines, you know, as a condition of the for loop so that you're iterating for each time. I really want to point out that there's only one correct way to read from a file. And you can use you can use the read lines or read lines or read methods, but there's a general format that you're always going to use, and this general format is as follows. So you're going to have, you know, file 1 equals open, you know, name.txt, comma, read, or comma, write. But now this in and of itself, open is great. Open, that's a really great function. So again, I'm going to draw a picture for you guys, and maybe this will get your understanding of it. So here's your program. You know, it's Christmas time and everything.
Robert,
Yeah, what's up?
the read, the R, need the P, what in the past
In the pasta. Oh,
the R.
does it? Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Good call. Yeah. So just make sure you make that correction. So basically, let's just say here. Okay. So let's say read. Right. I'm gonna make an analogy. We have a present here for Christmas. Because I mean it's Christmas time. I know we're all looking forward to getting something for Christmas, hopefully,
Not really.
or at least looking to give a gift then. But here's our present, right? Quick drawing of a present. So if we open that present, yeah, we just got the latest model of an action figure or video game. We just got a video game. We just got a Call of Duty.
Call of Duty.
And this is a few years in the future. 25. Call of Duty 25 at some point. Okay. Now, so we opened that present, sure. But can we just go on now and just say, okay, we just played Call of Duty 25? Can we go on the computer and say, we just beat the game Call of Duty 25 because we opened it? We opened that present. Can we say that?
No.
No. Because what do we actually have to do?
Play it.
We got to take it out of the box and actually play it. So in order to take it out of the box, put it, you got the CD, put it in the machine here, and you got your TV, your controller. In order to do that, we got to do. There's another step here, and what I'm trying to say is, here's the file. Okay, we open the file, but this in Python, this is just an IO wrapper object. Now you don't need to know what this is, but I know a lot of you, probably have gotten that error where it's a file IO wrapper object. What does that even mean? That means you took Call of Duty out of the wrapping paper. You didn't take it out of the box yet, and that's really what it is. Because right here, what we got to do, we have to read line or read lines. We gotta actually pop that thing into the machine now and play it. So in order to do that, we need to do, and not in a for loop or anything, because I know a lot of you guys like to use, for this, you're gonna get that wrapper object again. Because Python, it likes it a certain way. The way it likes you to do it is this. Read1, or whatever your variable name is, equals file1.read, or whatever.
Is that indented?
Huh?
Is that indented?
No.
Read one?
No. This is all equal indentation right there.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't mean to make it look that. I'm sorry. These two things. Now we can say we have this game. Let's do stuff with it. Let's hack it. Let's use cheat codes or something. But you still got to go through these steps. Remember, you got this is state 1. This is state 2. You got to get to state 3. You got 2 steps that you got to do between. You have a step from 1 to 2, and you got a step from 2 to 3. And these are the 2 steps. You got to open it, and somehow you have to read it, and not in a for loop. You have to read it here. Once you do that, now you can put it in a for loop, and now you can do it. Don't try to be fancy and say, I forget how they were doing it before. It was like some sort of for loop, and then here they were just saying file1.read. No, you can't do that. You need to. It was there was some stuff in between here. You need to set that to a variable. Because again, otherwise you're not putting it in the machine here. You're saying, I'm going to play this disk, but I'm not putting it in the machine. You need it to be in a variable. Okay, now we can start doing stuff with the data and everything. So how are we looking on time, by the way?
Pretty good.
We're good?
It's 10:23.
10:23, okay. What's up?
Can you go over read line and read lines?
Sure. Awesome. I'm glad you asked that. So I'm going to just erase my bad drawing here.
No, it's good.
But to all you guys understand that you need to have 2 variables. One is when you're actually opening it, and one's when you're actually getting the contents of that. Otherwise, your program's not gonna understand it. You're gonna get an error. So everyone's clear on that?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So now we have read. I'll put .read just so you guys know. .read line. And .read lines. Here we go. So does anybody want to start us off? What does read do?
Look at the string.
Yep, you get a string. So there were two things I heard. Read the entire file, you get a string, and those are the 2 key points. 1 point, return value is a string.
So
Second point,
it returns the whole Whole file?
Whole file.
As one line or like?
You get the whole file as one string.
Oh.
One string. Which means each line that you have is in that string. So how do you tell different lines? If you have different things on different lines in a file, in that string, what would that be represented by?
And
The what?
like an N and a back.
Yeah, the new line character.
New line.
If you're using read, the way you're going to tell the lines apart, you're going to search these things out. And you're going to somehow split that up based on the new line character if you're looking to separate each line.
Oh, so if you have like a text file and there's like 3 different lines, if you do .read and then the text file, it'll come out as one string.
But with these in between each line. So you'll have a line of the thing, and then it'll say new line. Because remember, that data is not lost. You're taking this data into a program, and you're just processing it in a different way. But remember, there's so much going on behind the scenes with ASCII and Unicode values and everything. What it does is, okay, we're now condensing this into a string. But now each time we get a break in a line, we have a new line, new line, new line. In that actual string, it's going to say new line, new line, new line. This is all data you're working with now. You're working with information, but you also work with data. These certain things that the computer does, I don't know the exact technical name, but I'll call it data because this isn't part of your actual information. This isn't part of, I went to John's house for his birthday. That's the new line character. You're not just going to be writing a letter and saying, okay, I went, yada, yada, yada. Okay, let me put a new line here and start my next line. It's the computer's doing that to say, when you try to convert this back into something, well, this is how we know what it is. And there's really an escape sequence here, so that's not an end, this is an escape sequence. And then this is the end. Together, escape sequence and N is new line. Escape sequence and T is tab. That's how the computer understands this information that you're trying to get to.
So in Python, it would come out as one line, right?
In Python, it'll come out as one string, again. One string with new line characters in there to delineate the lines, to show you the lines, to actually be able to put back into something. So you can start seeking out these lines with your program, and that's how you tell the different lines apart. Read line, someone help me out.
Read one line.
Any guesses?
It reads by the lines.
Reads by lines, okay. But what exactly is the return value of that?
A string.
Only
It's
one line.
A string, okay, and a one line, exactly. So we have a string, it returns a string. Returns string. And you get one line. Someone want to check in with Chris and ask him if he has any questions, just in case he wants to ask something? Just want to make sure everybody's able to ask questions. So again, you guys are seeing, break versus continue, for loop versus while loop. A lot of these things are similar in programming, but they're really kind of different because depending on which one you use, if you want to break stuff up into lines, this one, when we get here, you're going to see how this does it. You're going to see this breaks it up in new line characters, but in one big string. It all depends. That's going to determine what your program looks like. It's like drawing a picture. Yeah, you all have the same. You have supplies, but if you use watercolor, you're going to get a different look than if you use acrylic paint, or you're going to get, if you're I don't know, you could always play a video game, but it depends on what genre you're playing to determine what actually happens in the game. Are you playing RPG and going collecting stuff, fighting dragons or something? Or you playing a racing game where you're driving the car? Well, 2 different content things, but they're all really similar. They're all games. They're just these things they're all similar, but they're all kind of different in that whichever one you choose is going to dictate the rest of your program. Does he have any, like...
You have a charger.
A charger game. It's running low, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good call. I hope I have a charger. Yep, got it. You guys want to take a quick break after this? We'll take like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just finish up read lines and then we'll have a 5-minute break. Did he say he's good?
Yeah, no questions.
Okay, cool. So read lines. Anybody want to help me out? Return type and what actually is like return.
Return a list.
List. Yep. Okay. So we have a list.
How about line?
Return type.
Read one line.
What is each line though? Because now, okay. So the return value here was a string. Return value here, string. Okay. Return value of list, but each line is a what? A string, right? So each line is a string. So you were right in saying return value is a list. That's true. The overall return value is a list, but each line is stored in a string in that list. Is a string in that list. And I want to extend that and say each line is an element in that list, right? Because we have a line, so line 1 equals file 1. No space between the file and the E and the 1 equals L1, L2. These are elements of the list, right? And remember, indexing starts at 0. Don't make that mistake. Some people, they go in, they have all this pressure on them, they make a mistake. Just, again, if you remain calm and cool on these things, and if you watch some tutorials, read some stuff, and program on your own, do some practice problems, because some people are asking for another final. The only way I'd be able to give you guys another final is if I took the finals that were there and made a new final myself. And I don't have the time to do that because I have like a lot of finals that I have to study for. So the best thing I can say, if you really, really want to do a new final, redo those 2 finals, or go to the back of your textbook and practice those. Or if you feel like you know those inside and out, just start jumping on tutorials and just start watching some and just taking information and just see if somehow you could learn, every half hour you could learn 1 or 2 extra things that you may have forgotten while you were doing this stuff. Each line, what do I want to say else? Okay, so that you remember you get the whole file in a list, and each element is a line, a string in that list. What's up?
For read line, when you said one line, so it just prints out one line, that whole line.
One line. Good point. That's the other point I want to
touch. A specific line that you tell me.
One line. That first line. That first line that you hit. So how do you guys think we're going to kind of go through this? Because we, like Khan pointed out, we need a little bit more here. Does anyone understand?
Yeah. So let's say there's like 5 lines in the text file.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Sure. There's 5 lines. Let's make those 5 lines just so everyone sees it. Just so we're clear. 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is data.txt. Sure, go ahead.
Then you would do read line.
You do read line? Okay, so you want to open this. So you want to say file 1 equals open data.txt, and you're going to say for reading, right? And then you're going to say read 1. Again, there's no indentation here. Equals file 1 dot read. Read line. You said. Yep. So all you're getting, there's your return line. There you go. That's what you got. So why do we use this, right? Well, does anyone have a?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to read just like read line 1 and then lines 4 through 5? Like read line 1, 4, and line 5? Is there a way to do that?
Question.
Like in one line?
I get what you're saying. Yeah. To read on one line, I don't know about one line. Depends how you write your code. Probably you can squeeze onto one line, but it's probably multiple statements. But I'll go back to that in 1 second. The point I wanted to make, the point I was trying to ask you guys, use a for loop with read line. A for loop to iterate through those things. So if you use after this file.read line or for yada yada yada. That's you want to each time you want to read that line. So that's important, and that's really the important point that I want to point out. These 2 things can be independently used because you get the whole file. You have to use for loop with this. Now going back to your question, you want to know, is there a way we could pretty much skip 2 and 3?
Yeah.
Without taking them in. That's a really good question.
Unless you like, or do you have to write 2 separate lines of code?
You might have to write 2 separate lines of code. What you would do, if you're using a for loop and you could hard code it to skip these 2 you know, read line, read line, read line. So you could have the cursor literally read line, read line. It would still read these 2 lines, but you'd just be skipping over them. And then you'd be taking in these 2, storing them in a variable somehow. But it would be more than 1 line, I believe. The other way you could do it, you'd have to still take the information in. It's just you don't have to store that information anymore.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, you might store it in read, but now when you're actually making your actual list to be composited, you can take that, identify the new line characters, bust it up into different lines by that, bust it into a list, like split it at the new line character. If you use .split and you use a new line character, this is going to split it up into a list of lines. Effectively, you've just made read lines. You've done the same thing. Why would you want to do that? There's certain reasons you would. You might want to just go with read lines if your initial plan was just to do this, unless a problem says you have to use read. Then, of course, you know, then just testing your knowledge. But split it up at these lines, and then what you do is you just say, okay, I have a new list here. I just want to have this element, this element, this element, discard these 2, and that's. I don't think I need to explain that. That's just you're just taking you're just indexing this and just saying, okay, my new line 1 equals, you know, this would be whatever the name is, file 1 again, we'll just say, and file 1 2, because we said file 1 if there was an opening thing. Line 1 equals file 1 2 indexed at 0 because that's line 1. Skip line 2, skip line 3. Line 2 equals file 1 2 indexed at 3, because 3, remember we started indexing 0. Line 3 equals file 1 2 indexed at 4, right? Now we got that. Okay, well, list 1 equals line 1, line 2, line 3, and we just work around it. So no, I mean, could you do that all in 1 line? If you really want to write that code all on 1 line, I mean, I'm not sure if there's a way to do it in Python. You might have to use semicolons to break it up. I know there's one kid in one of the other sections, I think, that only writes his code in like 1 line. You just make some big block of code, but that's not good programming. Yeah, you want to make this small, efficient programs, but that's overkill. You want to make your program first and foremost readable by a human being.
Some question practice. So they'll ask you to, like, you want to read each word in a line.
Each word in a line?
Like one specific letter, like a vowel.
A vowel, okay.
You might have to, like, most likely use read lines, and then after that, you have to split the line, so that you can look at each of the word in the new list.
Right.
And then you like iterate over each word to find that one specific letter. So.
Yep, exactly, and that's the way you could use it.
Yeah.
You know, you get the line, and pretty much what Mitsuki was pointing out is that sometimes you have to check a line of words if they contain a certain letter. So now this is expanding. Okay, well, we could use read lines. Then we go iterate through each, you know, this is the indented for loop thing again. We now go through each word, now we go through each letter. So now we have, you know, for loop 1, and you actually can only use 1 for loop if you want, because then you could say, okay, in this word, if this is, you know, if that word contains this or that. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that with methods and stuff. But I think we'll take a 5-10 minute break. Sound good to you guys?